There is a number that FIFA wants you to remember, and there is a picture they desperately want you to forget. And the reason this story matters, the reason it is bigger than a bad image or a slow news cycle, is because those two things, the number and the picture, appeared within 48 hours of each other at the start of a World Cup that FIFA has spent 4 years telling the world would be the greatest in the history of the sport. The number came first. It came from Gianni Infantino himself, the president of the organization that runs global football. Standing in front of cameras on the eve of the tournament and defending his pricing strategy against a wave of supporter anger that had been building for months. And the word he chose, the specific, deliberate, confident word he chose to describe demand for this World Cup was unprecedented. Not strong, not record-breaking, unprecedented. And then he went further, he said demand exceeded supply by a factor of 10 or more. Factor of 10, those were his words. Not a rough estimate, not a ballpark figure, a factor of 10 or more, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who believes the numbers are on his side. Now hold that number in your head. Because the picture arrived the very next night, South Korea versus Czech Republic, Guadalajara, Mexico. The second smallest venue in the entire tournament, a stadium with a capacity of just over 45,000, sitting inside one of the most football-obsessed cities on the American continent. A city where football is not a weekend hobby but a cultural identity, a city that should have been desperate for tickets. A city that, according to Gianni Infantino, existed in a world where demand exceeded supply by a factor of 10 or more. And what the broadcast cameras found when they scanned that stadium, not in a quiet corner, not in the upper tier behind the goal, but in the sections closest to the pitch, the VIP sections. The premium seats, the ones priced at $400 for general admission and $5,000 for hospitality, what the cameras found were rows. Rows and rows of empty red plastic, not a few gaps, not the kind of natural scatter you always see when a few ticket holders run late, entire sections, vacant, visible, undeniable. Those two things, the claim and the image, do not describe the same planet. And that gap, that yawning, embarrassing, structurally revealing gap between what FIFA said and what the cameras showed, is what this video is about. Because this is not a story about a bad opening weekend. It is not a story about a single venue in Mexico that somehow got it wrong. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful organization in world football decides that the tournament no longer belongs to the people who actually love the game. And it is a story that has been building for a long time, long before the first ball was kicked in 2026, long before Infantino stood up and said factor of 10, it was already written in the data. Already visible in the prices, already screamed about by supporter groups across Europe and North America who were told, repeatedly and confidently, that everything was under control. It was not under control. Let us go back to the beginning. When FIFA announced its ticketing model for the 2026 World Cup, they introduced something that had never been used at a World Cup before: dynamic pricing. If you have ever tried to book a flight during school holidays or buy a concert ticket the moment they go on sale, you already know what dynamic pricing means in practice. It means the price is not fixed, it floats. It rises with demand, falls with lack of interest, and in theory reflects what the market is willing to pay at any given moment. FIFA presented this as innovation, as a way of making more tickets available to more people by letting prices find their natural level. That was the pitch, that was the promise. And on paper, in a world where demand genuinely exceeded supply by a factor of 10 or more, dynamic pricing sounds almost logical. If millions more people want tickets than there are tickets available, prices will rise. That is just supply and demand, and nothing about that is a scandal. But here is where the story breaks apart. The tickets that were initially listed as low as $60 did not stay at $60. By the time general sale opened in December, those same categories had climbed to $140. That is already more than double. Then, as demand continued and FIFA's dynamic model continued adjusting, prices across almost every match rose by an average of 34% above their listed price. Not 34% above what they once cost at $60, 34% above the already inflated general sale price. And on the official FIFA resale platform, the only legal fan-to-fan marketplace for the tournament, run by FIFA itself, with no price cap applied in the United States or Canada. The numbers stopped resembling football tickets entirely. The cheapest available ticket for the United States against Paraguay in Los Angeles, one of the most anticipated matches of the group stage in front of a home crowd, was listed at $2,735. Not for a hospitality package, not for a seat next to a celebrity, for a standard ticket to watch a football match. And in February, before the tournament had even begun, a single ticket to the final appeared on FIFA's own official resale site priced at $143,750. One ticket, one seat, one match, $143,000. Football Supporters Europe, the organization that represents fan groups across the continent, and had been raising the alarm about this pricing model for the better part of a year, did not mince their language when they responded. They called it extortionate, they said it would exclude ordinary fans. And they put a number on the scale of the problem that cuts through every piece of spin FIFA has attempted since. Ticket prices for this World Cup have increased by roughly 5 times compared to the 2022 tournament in Qatar. 5 times, and the Financial Times reported that as many as 180,000 tickets remained unsold across the entire tournament. Sit with that for a moment. A World Cup described by its own president as the most in demand in history, 180,000 empty seats. Nobody bought them, not because nobody wanted to go. Because nobody could afford to. Now, FIFA had an explanation for the empty seats in Guadalajara. Of course they did, they always have an explanation, and to their credit, they did not stay silent. They released a statement, and in that statement they said the official attendance for South Korea versus Czech Republic was 44,985, just shy of a sellout. A near full house. And they explained the visual discrepancy, the rows of empty red plastic that millions of people had watched on live television, by saying that several ticketed fans could be seen standing in concourses rather than staying in their assigned seats throughout the match. That was the explanation. The seats were not empty because nobody was there. The seats were empty because the people who had paid for them had chosen to watch from the corridor instead. Read that again slowly. FIFA's official position is that the most expensive seats in the building, the VIP sections closest to the pitch, the seats that cost $400 at the door and thousands more on the resale market, were empty because the people who paid for them decided they would rather stand in a hallway. Not because those seats were never filled, not because the tickets went unsold or were bought by hospitality packages that didn't show up. Because fans voluntarily abandoned premium seats to go and stand in a concrete corridor and watch the match from there. That is what FIFA is asking you to believe. And if you have attended a football match at any point in your life, if you have ever sat in a stadium and understood what it means to be close to the pitch, to feel the noise, to watch the game from a seat you paid for, then you already know how that explanation lands. It does not land as a clarification, it lands as an insult. But here is the thing about that statement that matters most, and it is the detail that transforms this from an embarrassing weekend into a genuine institutional scandal. FIFA said the official attendance figure reflects the number of tickets scanned and spectators present within the stadium footprint, rather than visual assessments of seating occupancy at any given moment. Which means FIFA is not counting how many people were in the seats, they are counting how many people scanned a ticket and walked through the gate. A ticket that was scanned at the turnstile at 7 in the evening by someone who then went and stood in a hospitality suite, or sat in a corporate lounge, or walked back out to the fan zone. That ticket counts as a filled seat in FIFA's official attendance record. The number is not a lie technically, but it is not the truth either. It is a number constructed in a way that makes the problem invisible, that transforms a stadium with hundreds of visibly empty premium seats into a near sellout on paper. And that allows the organization to stand behind a statistic, while the cameras tell a completely different story to the entire watching world. This is what institutional deception looks like when it is done carefully. It is not a fabricated number. It is a real number, measured in a specific way, presented without the context that would make it meaningful, deployed at precisely the moment when the alternative, honesty, would be damaging. And the reason it matters beyond Guadalajara, beyond one match, beyond one statement, is that FIFA has now established a precedent for how it will respond every single time the cameras show empty seats for the rest of this tournament. Which they will, because Guadalajara was not an anomaly, it was a data point, and it is pointing in a very specific direction. Consider the geography of the problem. The Estadio Akron in Guadalajara holds 45,664 people for this tournament. It is the second smallest venue in the competition. The only stadium smaller is Toronto's BMO Field, which holds 43,036. Every other stadium in this World Cup is larger. Most of them are significantly larger. Four of the venues, MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, AT&T Stadium in Arlington, and the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, hold more than 80,000 people. The Azteca held 80,000 fans for Mexico's opening match against South Africa, and that was the easiest sell of the entire tournament. A co-host nation, a home crowd. A city where football is religion and the Azteca is its cathedral. Of course it was full, but the Azteca is also scheduled to host matches that do not involve Mexico. Matches between nations whose traveling support will not fill even a fraction of an 80,000-seat stadium. Matches where the dynamic pricing model, the model that already left rows of premium seats empty in a 45,000-seat ground in a football-mad city, will be applied to a venue almost twice the size with half the organic demand. If FIFA cannot fill its smallest venue for a match involving two passionate football nations in a city with one of the deepest football cultures on the continent, what happens when the cameras pan across 80,000 seats in New Jersey for a group stage match between two nations whose combined traveling support might fill 10,000 of them? That is not a hypothetical designed to alarm, it is arithmetic, the same arithmetic that told supporter groups this would happen. The same arithmetic that the Financial Times applied when it reported 180,000 unsold tickets. The same arithmetic that FIFA's own pricing model, built on the assumption that unprecedented demand would absorb unprecedented prices, has now visibly, publicly, undeniably failed to survive contact with reality. And there is one more layer to this that FIFA has not addressed, one more piece of the picture that sits beneath the empty seat story and gives it a far darker edge. Because when the images from Guadalajara spread across social media and the questions started coming, where are the fans? Why are the best seats empty? What happened to the 6 million tickets FIFA says were sold? Something else began to surface. Reports, observations, and in some cases direct evidence that tickets which had gone unsold through FIFA's official channels were quietly appearing on the official FIFA resale platform. FIFA's own marketplace, the one with no price cap, the one where a ticket to the USA versus Paraguay match was listed at $2,735. The suggestion, and it is important to be precise here, this remains a suggestion supported by circumstantial evidence rather than a confirmed fact, is that FIFA, having priced its own tickets beyond what ordinary fans could afford, was effectively placing unsold inventory back into a secondary market it controls, at prices even higher than the originals, in an attempt to recoup revenue from a problem its own pricing model created. That is not a conspiracy theory, that is a business model with a paper trail, so let us bring this together. Because what we have established across this video is not a collection of isolated complaints, it is a chain. And every link in that chain was forged by the same hand, by the same organization, by the same set of decisions made over the same period of time, by people who understood exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway. Link 1, FIFA introduced dynamic pricing to a World Cup for the first time in history, presenting it as modernization, as innovation, as a way to make the tournament more accessible. What it actually did was remove the fixed price ceiling that had always existed between the governing body and the ordinary fan, and replace it with a floating number that would rise as high as the market or the algorithm allowed. Link 2, prices rose, not slightly, not in isolated cases, across almost every match by an average of 34% above listed price. On the official resale platform, by orders of magnitude beyond that, a ticket that began at $60 ended up at hundreds. A ticket to the final appeared at $143,000. Football supporters Europe called it extortionate. The Financial Times confirmed 180,000 tickets went unsold. The data was not hidden, it was public. FIFA saw it, FIFA knew. Link 3, the tournament began. And in the second smallest stadium in the competition, in a city that should have been the easiest place on the entire continent to fill a 45,000-seat ground, the cameras found empty rows in the most expensive sections. Not a few gaps, not late arrivals. Sustained, visible broadcast quality evidence that the pricing model had done exactly what supporter groups had warned it would do for months. It had priced the seats above what real fans were willing or able to pay and left them for corporate buyers who did not show up. Link 4, FIFA's response was not an apology. It was not an acknowledgement that prices had gone too far or that the model needed adjustment. It was a statement explaining that the fans were probably in the corridor. It was a definition of attendance that counts a scanned ticket as a filled seat regardless of whether a human being ever occupied that chair. It was a number 44,985, designed to make the problem disappear on paper while it remained entirely visible on screen. And now we reach the part of this story that is not about the past, because what happened in Guadalajara is already history. The seats were empty, the statement was released, the social media posts were made, and the news cycle moved on. But the tournament has not moved on, it has barely begun. There are more than 90 matches still to be played. 90 matches across stadiums that are, almost without exception, significantly larger than the one that already exposed the limits of FIFA's pricing model in its very first week. And the pricing model has not changed. The resale platform has not introduced a price cap. The dynamic algorithm is still running. The same conditions that produced empty VIP sections in Guadalajara are still in place, applied now to venues that hold 80,000 people. In cities where the organic local demand for a match between, say, two European nations or two African nations will be a fraction of what it was for a co-host country playing a home game. This is why the empty seats in Guadalajara are not an embarrassment, they are an omen. And over the next 6 weeks, as the tournament moves through its group stage and into the knockout rounds, as the cameras follow the football from city to city and stadium to stadium, those cameras are going to keep scanning. They are going to keep finding the truth that FIFA's attendance figures are designed to obscure. And every time they do, the distance between what Gianni Infantino said, factor of 10, unprecedented demand, the greatest World Cup in history, and what the world can see with its own eyes is going to grow wider. Now there is a version of this story where FIFA course corrects, where the organization looks at what happened in Guadalajara, looks at the public reaction, looks at the 180,000 unsold tickets, and makes a decision to release inventory at reduced prices, to cap the resale market, to find a way to get real fans into the real seats before the cameras document the same problem in a stadium twice the size. That version is possible. It has happened before at major sporting events when the optics became too damaging to ignore. Organizations have swallowed losses and filled grounds because the alternative, the image of a World Cup playing out in front of empty seats, was simply too costly in reputational terms to sustain. But here is what makes FIFA different. Here is what makes this particular organization, at this particular moment, resistant to the kind of course correction that any normally functioning institution would instinctively make. FIFA's ticketing revenue for this tournament is already at the highest level it has ever reached in the competition's history. It represents a larger share of total tournament revenue than at any World Cup before it. 6 million tickets have been sold, Infantino confirmed that himself, and the average price of those tickets is higher than it has ever been. The financial model is working, in the narrow sense that it is generating revenue at a record rate. The fact that it is simultaneously producing empty seats, excluding ordinary fans, and generating the most damaging optics the organization has faced in years. None of that shows up in the revenue column. None of that costs FIFA money in any immediate, measurable sense. And so the incentive to change, to absorb a financial loss in exchange for full stadiums and better pictures, is genuinely weak. The shareholders of this nonprofit organization, if we can call them that, are not the fans standing in corridors. They are the member federations whose distributions depend on total tournament revenue, and total tournament revenue is fine, which brings us back to the number and the picture, factor of 10 or more. And rows of empty red plastic in the VIP section of the second smallest stadium in the competition. Those two things cannot both be true at the same time. One of them describes a World Cup where demand is so overwhelming, so historic, so far beyond any previous tournament, that a factor of 10 is the only honest way to capture it. The other describes a World Cup where the organization running the sport priced its own fans out, filled the gap with corporate buyers who didn't show up, and then drafted a statement explaining that perhaps those fans were watching from the hallway. You have watched enough football to know which one of those descriptions matches the pictures. The cameras are going to keep rolling for 6 more weeks, 90 more matches, stadium after stadium. And every time those cameras pan across a bank of empty seats in a venue that FIFA announced as sold out, the same question is going to hang in the air, unresolved and unanswered. Not a conspiracy. Not a theory, just the simplest, most stubborn question in the world. If demand exceeded supply by a factor of 10, where is everybody?